The goal of this podcast is to help you break in and thrive in advertising. And this is Adjunct, where we interview the top advertising lecturers and professors across the country to lend some knowledge to your ear without spending thousands of dollars on a university credit. This week, you will hear from Lou Schiavone, professor of practice at Michigan State University. Go Green. He's a professor of practice, which is an illustrious title in academia. While your standard professor has a terminal degree, usually a PhD, professors of practice earn their way into academia by proving themselves as experts with real industry experience. And Lou's got plenty of that, with around 30 years of writing ads at agencies. As an advertising writer and creative director, Lou Schiavone has had an impressive record of building brands and winning almost every major industry creative award at agencies such as Ogilvy, McCann Erickson, TBWA, Schiavone, and Donor. Lou has helped countless aspiring advertisers in his 7+ years of teaching at Michigan State. And he does this by teaching MSU advertising majors about copywriting and its critical role in creating an advertising campaign. And I've spoken to hundreds of professionals, and the consensus is that you need a few fantastic campaigns that stick out to break into advertising. If you want to break into this business as an art director, copywriter, strategist, or heck, even account, it is worth checking out Breaking and Entering's brand new Crowbar Awards. We are releasing a new creative brief every quarter for you to work on with a friend, and whether or not you enter is up to you, but we have Greg Hahn judging this first show. He's the co-founder of Mischief, one of the top agencies in the business, and he's probably the top creative in the business right now. So the show, it's an award and a tool. The best campaign will earn an actual blue crowbar, but we do not advise you to break into an advertising agency with it, but if you do, take some pictures because that's awesome. But overall, recruiters and professionals will be watching. For more details on that, check out the podcast description or reach out to me directly. Now on with the show. This is the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast Adjunct Edition. And as usual, I'm your accomplice, Gino Schellenberger. Kick it, Mikey. All right, Lou Schiavone, welcome to the Adjunct segment of the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast. How are you doing today? And thank you for coming on.
Well, hi, Gino. Thank you for having me on. I'm doing well. It's actually, I got all my grades done, so
There you go.
I'm on break.
How the students do this semester?
By and large, actually quite well. Yeah.
Good. We like to hear that. So you must have done a great job teaching, because that's why you're on. The goal of this podcast, really, this segment, is to interview the best advertising lecturers, professors, or adjunct level people across the country. And you've been recommended to represent Michigan State. We had Greg Tauscher on as well from another episode. So some great talent at Michigan State. Definitely a hub for creative advertising students, because you are a professor of practice, I believe. Is that the correct?
Yes, it's an honorary title. It doesn't assume a particular academic designation like assistant professor or associate professor or full professor.
That's a great title.
But it is an honorary title, and it's not bestowed. It's not a given. So I actually was very pleased. I truly knew nothing about the way the academy, as they call academia. The people in academia refer to it as the academy, which is really kind of cheesy, isn't it?
I've never heard that.
Have you heard it before? No?
I've never heard the people refer to it as the academy.
It had to be explained to me, because when I thought of the academy, I thought of Plato's Academy, things that I'd read when I was in college. But that's how people in the academic biz refer to it as the academy. So
gotcha.
So it's not necessarily, the title of professor of practice isn't necessarily bestowed on everyone.
No, it's actually a sought after role, especially within the advertising sector, or discipline of this higher education.
Yeah, and it means that it designates you as someone who comes from the real world,
Right.
essentially. Yeah.
And we don't need to discuss the landscape of advertising education and the importance of I think everybody here understands the importance of a professor of practice, somebody that has real world experience, has done it, and you have done. We'll get into that, but you've won plenty of awards. You've been at some amazing agencies for a majority of your career, and now you've been at Michigan State for 7 years. So that's impressive. Like, any student's going to value that. So we'll get into that, but I want to get into now, like, your advice for our student listeners. And the first question I have for you is why? Why leave an impressive career in creative advertising to teach? Why are you teaching advertising?
Well, that's a very good question. Um, and one that I ask myself
Sure.
from time to time. Um, I had been in Michigan uh, previously. I got recruited by Donor, which is a big agency
Mm-hmm.
here,
Good job.
from New York City, and I left Michigan, went back to the East Coast, and was freelancing back in Manhattan. And had been doing that for, I don't know, 8 years or so. And I got an email from a friend in Lansing, asking me if I ever thought about teaching. And then there was a little note that said "See attached," and it was an email from the man who at the time was the chairperson of the Department of Advertising and Public Relations at Michigan State,
Nice.
asking local advertising creatives if they knew of anyone who might come and teach the copywriting courses in the curriculum, because the gentleman who had been teaching them previously had to leave. His wife had become unwell, and
Sure.
they
There was an
sold the
opening.
home.
Yeah.
And there was an opening, and it was only supposed to be for a semester until they could find a full-time replacement. And I thought, it was August in New York City, and anyone who's ever been in New York City in August can tell you it's not a pleasant place, right? It's humid, it stinks, and it's really hot.
Yeah.
So I thought, yeah, I could get out of here for a few months. I wouldn't mind that. It was only supposed to be for like 3 or 4 months. And then they asked me to come back for the spring semester, and then they asked me to interview for the job when they posted it. And I agreed to all of it because what I found is I was liking it more and more as time went on.
Yeah.
I had no training. I never took an education class in college. I never trained to be a teacher, although my dad started out as a teacher. I had a lot of teachers in my family. Education, I don't have the patience,
Mm-hmm.
or I didn't think I had the patience
Sure.
to be a
Sure.
teacher. So it was not where I saw myself going. But when you get to a certain age, uh, and you look around at the faces of people in an ad agency, you realize that they're really young. Advertising tends to be a youngish business.
Yeah.
You don't see a lot of 60-year-olds running around ad agencies or walking
Yeah.
around ad
Yeah.
agencies.
Walking. Yeah.
So, for me, it was a question of how much longer do I want to be on the treadmill,
Yeah.
in New York City, which is the city that I know best.
Okay.
And I wasn't planning to move to go to LA or Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, you know, maybe teaching is something that I can do as sort of the last chapter of my career. And that's kind of where I nutted out. I thought, I think I can do more in the classroom than I could necessarily do in an agency. I've done a lot of campaigns over my
Of course.
over my career. And so I opted for the academy, as they call it. I
Of course.
opted to teach, and I enjoy it very much.
So did you go to Michigan State?
No,
No.
I went to my undergraduate. My undergraduate was done at St. Michael's College in Burlington, Vermont, outside of Burlington.
So then who called you up to go to Michigan State again? What was that scenario?
You want me to walk you through the whole thing?
No, I mean, you don't have
All
to.
right.
I'm just like, I guess my question is, you want to go from New York to East Lansing, and that you were cool with that.
Well, bear in mind that I started my career in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
and as my career was making an ascent, I got a headhunter called me and asked and said, there's an opening at an agency in Seattle, which
Sure.
was a place that I had been looking to possibly relocate to. Seattle, Portland, those were kind of on my list. And because what was going on in Manhattan was that I was getting known really well, but for doing print work. And I really wanted, as a young creative, I needed more broadcast, and I wasn't getting what I needed. So I thought the best thing would be to go to a heavy broadcast agency that might even be located outside New York City, get the creative there, and then maybe go back to New York whenever.
Strategic play. Got it.
So the headhunter asked about, I made a list of places where I thought I might want to go. Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Minneapolis was really hot at the time.
Fallon.
And so Portland Seattle really dovetailed with my own plans. And I set my portfolio. I got a call back from the headhunter saying they decided to put a hold on the job. They're not hiring.
Sure.
But how about, Jeb, what do you think about Detroit? And I said, not much. I don't really know anything about it. It's not a place I've thought about relocating to. Why? He said, well, there's this agency Donor, and I think you might be a really good fit. And I would have said no to that, except I had been listening, I don't know, a week or two earlier to, I don't even know if this exists anymore. And I can't remember the name, the Mercury Awards.
Mercury Radio. Yeah.
Yes, and it was for radio.
Yep. They do radio. Yep. That's still a thing.
And does it still exist?
Yep.
Oh, great. Well, and it just so happens that the grand prize winner was Donor for a campaign that was done for I'm not sorry, pardon me for not being so great with names this evening. For Highland Appliance, which doesn't exist. It hasn't existed for a long time, but it was like you could buy stereos and electronic equipment there.
Like a Radio Shack.
It was sort of like that. But I think you could also buy dishwashers.
Okay. A little bit of everything.
Everything. And so if I hadn't just listened to that campaign, like, a matter of weeks or days or weeks ago, I would have said no. But I thought, well, I said, how much broadcast do they do? And he said they're like 90% broadcast.
There you go.
And so I thought, then there was like that box got ticked off. And he sent, I said he could send my portfolio. I went on vacation to visit my parents on Martha's Vineyard.
Nice.
I flew back to Manhattan, and this was, I know this dates me just terribly, but nonetheless, I have to explain it. There was no internet. There was no way of checking messages. The most advanced thing you could have was an answering machine.
Sure.
And so I had a really fancy wall phone, landline, right? Because there weren't cell phones at the time.
Of course.
With an answering machine. And when I got back from Martha's Vineyard to my apartment in New York City, there were like 20 messages from the headhunter saying, where are you? They want you. They want to fly you out. They love your portfolio, blah, 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 blah. So
This donor you're talking about.
This was donor. This
Yep.
was summer of 1988.
Do you remember who you interviewed with?
I do.
What was the name?
There were several people, right? So let me just so it was. I spoke a while back about August in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
This was August in New York City, but it was the summer where heat records were being broken.
Oh yeah.
It was and it wasn't just in New York. It was pretty much everywhere.
Sure.
The lawns were browning out. I had lived in New York City for many summers without an air conditioner, and my parents came down to New York City and said, "Come with us." We went to an appliance store. They bought me a really fancy air conditioner, paid a guy to put it on a dolly, walk it 20 blocks, and then install it. But it was that kind of summer. So I remember standing on the corner of Amsterdam Avenue and 91st Street. I lived on 91st Street, and looking down Amsterdam, and there was something called the thermal inversion, which happens when it gets really hot, and all of the schmutz, the exhaust, and all that stuff just hangs. It's like smog, but like this condensed, really dense black cloud.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So anyway, I flew to Detroit, got picked up, got brought to the agency. Now, mind you, I don't know anything about Detroit, and donor technically wasn't in Detroit. It was in the suburb called Southfield, right next to Detroit. And I interviewed with a guy named John DeSerchio, who actually had written the Highland Appliance campaign. And
nice.
He was very talented. He was a true Horatio Alger story, because he had literally, I believe, started out driving a milk delivery truck, and donor was on his route. And he applied for a job in the mailroom, and he would read scripts that were being trafficked, and thought I could do that, and ultimately worked his way up from the mailroom to be like the creative director. I mean, he was a very talented guy. And so I interviewed with him. I interviewed with a guy named Gary Wolfson, who actually became my boss, but he also became a very, very good friend.
Nice.
And I interviewed they told me that I would need to run a creative group, and I had one experience doing that at Ogilvy and I hated it. I remember asking creatives to change things, was like sort of asking them to kill their mother, and it was just really. And I said, I don't want to run a group. I just want to write. That's all I want to do, is just be a writer. So they said, okay. They introduced me to these guys who ran a team. They were older gentlemen. Gail Silverberg and Joe Manella. I remember the names. Lovely men, both. Gail was the writer, and I actually became quite close to him. He was just a lovely, lovely man. And I had lunch with them, said goodbye, went back to the agency. The car drove me back to the airport. I went back to Manhattan, and I thought, I don't think this is going to happen. And 2 days later, I had the phone call offering me the job. And I thought, you know what? And it was at a time when I was doing very well at McCann. I was at McCann Erickson, and I actually didn't need to leave. My career was actually going very, very well. But I thought, you know what? It's a forgiving business in many ways. If I leave and I don't like it, I can come back, I suppose, to New York City or move on. So, so I moved, and I decided I was going to be in Michigan for a couple of years. I'd get as much TV, much broadcast as I could, and then I'd move on or go back to New York or whatever.
Right.
And I wound up running a group. I actually really didn't like being a writer in somebody else's group. So I decided to run my own. I got paired up with a guy named Mike Ward, who was a very talented art director, and he and I ran a group for like 8 years. I didn't plan to stay in Michigan for that long. I had had a couple of offers from Chicago and other places, but I met my partner, Michael, and that changed things. So instead of staying in Michigan, for 2 or 3 years, I stayed here for 19.
Wow.
And then I moved back east. And so that's where I was when Michigan State.
Okay. Got it. That gives some context why you were willing to go back to
So I call this my second tour of duty.
I gotcha.
In Michigan.
And I appreciate you telling this story because it gives us a lot of insight to your credibility. You hinted at some amazing agencies that you worked at as a writer. You won many awards. Your accolades are on the Michigan State website here, as I'm reading on the faculty page here. So I appreciate you sharing that. So now I want to get into what's your teaching philosophy after all of your years of learning in the industry. What's your purpose? What's your teaching philosophy? What do you want students to get out of your classes when you're teaching them at Michigan State?
My teaching, well, I have different teaching philosophies for different classes. I just want to be clear because
fair.
I teach. I don't teach freshmen at all, thank God.
Yeah, get them out of here.
Well, you know what? It's a lot like teaching I've learned that teaching freshmen is a lot like teaching high school. I mean, they're still really kids.
Yeah, I get that's fair. It's good to shape them though and inspire them at a young age if they're not sure. We had a professor at Illinois that would just like basically recruit for the Department of Advertising early on, but you want to get in there and create some concepts, I'm sure.
Well, there's first of all, it's a liberal arts, it's a 4-year liberal arts institution. So the first 2 years are basically devoted to getting all of their requirements out of the way.
Right.
So you're talking about English and history and languages and all that.
Sure.
So truly, they don't start focusing on their major until their junior year, really.
Yeah.
So I teach mostly juniors and seniors. I teach introductory writing. I teach 3 levels of writing. And I teach a capstone class, which has to be taken by anybody who's going to major in advertising, whether they're on the market. We have 2 tracks in our department, which is one is the management track and the other is the creative track.
Nice.
And it's the capstone is called integrated campaigns. Most 4-year, I know Syracuse has a very similar campaign. UT at University of Texas at Austin has one. I think Brigham Young, the big programs all have them. And it's basically you teach a class where the students get a real client.
Yeah, Illinois has that too. Alabama has one. A lot of the professors we've talked to, they also do this. Is it 8 weeks or is it 16?
16.
16. Okay.
14 to 16 weeks.
Sure.
And so my philosophy is different for different classes. I tend to be more hands-on in my introductory writing classes because the kids are younger. They have a lot of insecurity about writing. They're still finding their voice.
Right. I
mean, one could say that that's a career-long, process. But when you usually, as my experience as a writer is that I can write in many different voices, but there's usually one voice I'm most comfortable in, and it's characterized by certain things. And so that's my philosophy in my introductory writing classes, is to help them find their voice doing different exercises, but mostly because it's writing. I don't teach out of a book. There are any number of excellent textbooks that exist. The one that I like best is the one that was written by Luke Sullivan, who I think heads up the creative program at Savannah College of Art and Design.
He no longer works there. He was on the podcast. Luke's great.
Oh, okay. Where is he now? Or
I
is he
think
retired?
he left SCAD. I think he's done teaching for now. He's doing a lot of speaking engagements, writing probably, and he just released his latest book, Hey Whipple, Squeeze This. Yes,
Well,
that's
Hey
the standard. Yeah.
Well, Hey Whipple, yeah, it's like 19th, printing, and I
Yep.
think they keep he
updates it.
Well, yeah, Ed, I can't remember his last name. Ed, there's a guy that Luke wrote the original book, and then I think there's someone who helped him write the parts about social media that which were added on.
Yep.
Sort of subsequently.
Sure.
In any event, that's a great book, and I tried teaching out of it for one semester, and it's a good resource.
It's a great resource.
But my belief as a writer is that, and my referring back to my own career, I realized that the thing that makes you a better writer is writing. And so doing is really is what you need to do to break in. And that's what I have them do. I have them write a lot.
I like that. So this is interesting. I was going to ask you, like, do you focus on portfolio creation? And if so, how? So we're talking about writers here. You have the capstone. Let's put the capstone to the side. Usually let's put that to the side. For your writers, so you're giving them like briefs consistently? How are you like getting their students' portfolio creative work?
Well, that's an interesting topic that you just introduced. So, Michigan State, there are many great things about the program. The thing that I noticed most was when I came there was that there were no classes where writers and art directors worked together. Partly because writers tend to self-identify, at least in my experience, after college, right? Generally, because art directors have a skill set. They can draw, they can paint, they can do cool visual stuff. Yeah, so they're more clued in to what they might want to do.
Graphic design or art direction, really, we're talking about.
Writers, I mean, most writers that I know, copywriters, didn't really, grow up going, I want to be a copywriter. They backed into it in some way.
Sure.
So that was the first thing I noticed about the program, was that model, which is still in place, right? All these years after Bill Bernbach introduced it at DDB, during the creative revolution, it still exists, and Michigan State wasn't really doing it. And if you don't do that, then how do you build a portfolio, which is a combination of visual and copy?
Right.
So, and they don't have that many portfolio classes. They have one portfolio class that I know of, and it's a 1-credit class. So the business of building a portfolio is left to the student. And I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was in college, I had no fucking clue. Can I say
yeah,
that?
You're good. For sure.
I had no fucking clue what a portfolio was. I didn't know, so these, it's not their fault, but I give them a helping of reality. And I explain about portfolio schools.
Okay. What are your thoughts on that?
what are my thoughts
What do
on
you
that?
say? What do you when you're talking to them about portfolios and portfolio schools? What do you
I,
say?
I say, let's go to, well, I think Creative Circus is actually,
Just shut down.
well, yeah, but they used to show like the portfolio. You could go, anyone could go and look at the portfolios of the recent graduates,
Of course. Yep.
and they were really good. And
Mhm.
I I told them that they can do that at School of Visual Arts. I think they can actually do that. I'm not sure if they do that at SCAD, but there are a lot of places where these kids can look at portfolios, and I
Yep.
urge them to, because my my whole point is you meet your competition, right?
Yeah, that's who you're up
This is,
against.
and I know, I mean, I know of agencies where creative directors don't want to see portfolios that don't come from come from other places than portfolio schools. They don't want to see them because they know portfolio schools graduates will be um, sort of have a higher sense of creativity, and in some ways they're not wrong, but I also think it's really unfair to just like paint all portfolio school graduates with a brush that says great and all others with a brush that says not. And
Sure.
so I explained to them that you're going to get reduced to not even a portfolio site, because most of them don't want to spend the time. You're going to get reduced to some sort of JPEG or PDF of like 10 or 12 really great ads, and your resume. And that's what you're going to send. So you better have 10 or 12 really great pieces. You better have a whole portfolio of great pieces. So as a teacher of copywriters, I really try to focus on building a portfolio in all areas: social, production, video, radio. Oddly enough, excuse me.
Yeah, radio is still relevant.
Oh, no, radio is relevant. What I love about advertising is people love to make pronouncements. Radio's dead. Print is dead.
No.
And yet, interestingly, everyone wants to see print. Why? Because it's the mother medium, and you can sort of, my belief at least, is that, and I don't know why this is so, but it is, you can pivot from print to, print is proof of concept,
Mhm.
right? So you can pivot from print to radio, from print, and you can pivot to
Yeah, it
video,
starts print. It always starts
right?
print.
It always starts with print. It doesn't hold true. If you have a great commercial or video idea, it doesn't mean that it's going to make a great radio spot or a great print ad.
Right.
So even though everyone was so quick to jump on the print is dead bandwagon, for a medium everybody started grieving for, sure as fuck is still alive,
Yep.
and
Oh yeah, of
and
course.
and so we work very hard on print. We work.
You're
I
teaching them how to write good headlines, I'm sure. Like you're doing the basics of like good writing.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if you can't build a portfolio in your undergrad, not a lot of schools can, and or you want to focus on what you need to be good at in your specific discipline, right? If you're going to be a copywriter, then you should have those basic skills down at least.
Well, also I try hard. I mean, it's really hard to get it all in a semester, but my belief is, and has always been, right? I was always fascinated by advertising history, like what did ads look like before,
Sure. Study the
you know,
greats.
and so because I honestly believe it's very hard to know where you're going if you don't know where you've been.
Right.
And so I urge them, I show them commercials from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, so they can see evolution, and also they can see what happened with print ads. We're essentially living in an era now of poster advertising. Posters had big images, there was one line of copy, there was a logo for the advertiser.
Mm-hmm.
You could take it in one glance. It was like, it was, it was, that's what defined a poster. Well, now we're living in an era of posterized advertising where, everything's got one line, if any, on it. And so I show my students these really brilliant ads. When I started out, I used to have to go through what was called the Pan Am building, which is, I think now was the MetLife building, right up above Grand Central. And I would have to cut through Grand Central. And there was this amazing magazine stand, which I'm sure is long gone. And I used to stop, and when I had a few bucks, I would buy magazines like the Tatler from the UK and other magazines. And I started a terror file. And when I moved my my stuff out here from the East Coast, I found it. I forgot I had it. And there were some really amazing ads from the 80s, from London and from the US. Especially, there was an agency named Ammirati and Puris that had the BMW account at the time. And they wrote really long copy ads, like double page spreads, but literally the top half was a visual, bottom half were like
an Ogilvy-esque.
And I mean, I show them some of my work, which was long copy. And I said, that's what copywriting really used to be. You had a lot of room. Now you have to do it more visually.
Mm-hmm.
You have to write the story. But what I explain to my writers, and it's really important that they know, is that even though something is primarily visual, doesn't mean it's not written.
Mm-hmm.
It's written, right? It's written just the way a screenplay has, open on a seedy hotel room. It's
Scripts.
just, it's just dawn, right? It's setting everything up.
Yeah.
So
narrative.
So the writing is largely invisible, but nonetheless present.
Yeah.
And
definitely concepting as well. I mean, just like that idea of creating the ads and writing it down is super important.
But the thing is, if you haven't been trained, and my students haven't, to work with an art director and together two heads are better than one, they're really used to working alone because it's the only way they've worked. So we started something at Michigan State. Actually, one of my students, just before that time, just before COVID hit,
Sure.
came to me and said, I have an idea. And her idea was, what if we started this place? We called it the Creative Center. And basically, it was staffed by writers and art directors who would get paid. And people who wanted to work on stuff for their books or their portfolios could come. People who needed help with class projects could come. And essentially it started like a month before lockdown. So we're still running it, and it's an opportunity, probably the only opportunity really, for writers and art directors to work together.
So they work together and they're getting paid. And what are they producing?
They're producing, well, if I'm a writer and I come for help, I'm not getting paid, but the person who's helping me is getting paid, right?
Okay.
So we have like, I don't know, 6 writers and 6 art directors. And we have someone who is running the Creative Center, a student, who matches up, the right.
So who's coming, I guess, like who's showing up and asking for help?
It could be, as I was saying, it could be anyone. It could be a writer needing an art director.
Oh, cool.
An art director needing a writer. Somebody from the business school needing help with graphics for a presentation.
I gotcha.
And so it costs the person who's coming to the Creative Center nothing.
Nice.
And the student who's helping, the writer or art director who's helping, gets paid.
I love it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And so, it's I would like to say there's been, a long line of people waiting. It's taken a little while for it to catch on because I think most people didn't know about it, and then all those months and months of being in lockdown,
Yeah.
people didn't. I mean, we actually did do some work, via Zoom, but
Yeah.
to me, you asked about portfolios, and I try very hard to be realistic with my students and to also let them know that they can build a great portfolio. They can build a portfolio that actually could have come out of a portfolio school. They just have to work their asses off to do it. Right. And so if you don't really want it, then I got it. Find another career, do something else. But if you really want it, then you damn well better have the goods, because
Yep.
you're going to be going up against kids who live, eat, breathe, sleep portfolio at
Right.
these schools. And also there are other schools, like, I don't know if you've ever seen any work out of Brigham Young. Have you?
The ad lab. Yep.
And so we haven't done this in a few years, since before lockdown. But we used to go to the one club,
Mhm.
Creative Week, which was literally the week after graduation at Michigan State, and we take a group of seniors who just graduated, or some really advanced juniors, and they would go through the portfolio reviews, and so I used to get asked to review a
Mhm.
lot of these portfolios from, and I was seeing books from like Central St. Martin's in London and other really great schools in the US, and a lot of work by Brigham Young. And I was astonished at how good it was. I didn't even know, because I mean, not being from academia, I didn't really uh, do have time to do my homework on what were the great advertising programs and what weren't. So I've learned them over time. And when I saw a number of portfolios from Brigham Young, and it was like, damn, these are good. These are
Yeah.
really good.
Yep.
So I do whatever I can to help my students build their portfolios. They're getting jobs, and they're getting jobs at good places. I mean, one of my students from the very first class I taught is now out at Goodby.
Oh,
Uh,
that's one of the best. Yeah.
yeah, and so we know I mean, they're getting gigs, which is really good. But they're but they have to work their asses off to get them.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's true for everybody. There's no easy portfolios. So I like
Yeah.
it. What else? I mean, let's go with one last final piece of advice here for students out there. Work hard on your portfolio in your free time. If your school doesn't give you, it doesn't match you up with an art director, find an art director or copywriter, whatever your opposite is, and work on in your free time is what I would recommend. And look for briefs that are creative. Break entering is starting our own briefs. We're doing a brief every quarter. That will provide you that experience and will help you, and it's not going to waste your time on some smaller project that recruiters might not know. So it'll be larger brands. So I want to get that out there. But what else, Lou? What else do you say to these people?
Well, I suggest, talking about to my students or to anybody.
So our audience listening to this podcast,
All
who
right.
are students across the country.
Okay, audience listening to this podcast, students across the country, unite.
Yes.
So here's my advice. You don't necessarily, when I look at a portfolio and I see a spec ad for Apple, I know it's a spec ad.
Right.
There are millions of small, cool companies or brands that you can pick. You don't have to do Apple. You don't have to do Nike.
If you're doing those two, you're going up against the best advertising of all
Right.
time. You're not going to be Wyden and Kennedy. You're
I
not going to
will,
be TBWA.
No, and I will tell you, I gave a running shoe assignment, not a Nike assignment, sort of a
Sure.
general. And I had a young woman who is in the business now, do an ad. She took Nike, as was the brand she chose,
Hmm.
and she literally did work that I honestly think could have been run by Wieden Kennedy for
That's
Nike.
great.
It's the only time I've seen it done, only once.
It's
And
hard. I mean, why put yourself against
right,
the best?
right.
And
So I mean,
and then even if you do something great for those brands, you're just keeping up with them. I doubt. I mean, you could get a black sheep that creates the best Nike. It's not possible, actually. You're going to be keeping up with them.
so you asked my advice, what parting advice I would give.
Hmm.
Does it have to? Can it be a couple of different parts, or does it have to just be one piece of advice?
Do whatever you think.
Right. Okay. So my first piece of advice is this: if you need to be told what to do at all times, don't go into advertising.
Boom.
Okay.
Love it.
Because really, it's not a business for people who want to be spoon fed.
Yep.
Nobody has the time, and you're going to become known as a pain in the ass.
Yep.
Number two, you better really like failing, because I have a quote somewhere in some box that I moved out here from the East Coast. It's a quote by Samuel Beckett. And I think it goes something like fail, period, fail better, period, fail again.
Yep.
Because failure is an essential component of success, right? I mean, rarely do campaigns that are considered iconic, rarely do they come out of a writer's head fully formed, on the first round.
No.
Right?
Yep.
You better know that there were some drafts that failed miserably before that.
Yep.
So you have to be able to embrace failure. It's very difficult to do. We all want to win, but you need to sort of prepare yourself. And the other is, you really better love writing, right? If you don't love writing, or if you don't love the kind of writing that copywriting is and is evolving into,
Yep.
you should go write something else. But really, you should. It's a great business for people who want to test themselves continuously, like the length of an entire career.
Yeah, true. Perfect.
Those are my little pieces of advice.
They're great. I love them. All right. How can people reach out to you if they have any other questions, maybe want to help out with the portfolio? I know you're busy, but can students do that if they're not your own?
Yeah, of course.
Great. What's the best way to reach you?
What's the fake number they always give? 555?
Yep.
Call me 55? No. You can reach me at my Michigan State email, which is SCHIAVO number 3. So it's Schiavo 3. SCHIAVO 3 at MSU.edu.
Perfect. Amazing. Well, if you're listening, go and you're interested, go and reach out. Lou, this has been great. I really do appreciate you telling us about your story, about how you teach, about your advice for students breaking into advertising. Is a wonderful business. So we do appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Gino. I appreciate you're having me on. It was
Of course. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this entire episode of the Breaking and Entering Advertising podcast. If you like what you heard, it would mean a lot to us and help us grow and get better guests and better break-ins if you can go to Apple Podcasts and leave us 5 stars and a small review if you have the time. Be sure to connect with our guests if you like what they said by going to our Instagram at Breaking and Entering Pod. That's all one word, Breaking and Entering Pod on Instagram. We have links to their portfolios and their LinkedIn, and they want to connect, so do that. And thank yous. Thank you to Mikey Malarkey, our audio engineer, and Buchan Zhang, our creative director. Can't do it without you two, and a team from the University of Illinois. It's a student team from the agency called AdBuzz. They're a PR agency, and it's been a pleasure working with them. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next week with another amazing guest. Thank you so